Good afternoon, and welcome to the 9th episode in the Santa Monica Conservancy's Mosaic program. I'm Libby Motica. I'm the co-chair of the Conservancy's program committee, and I'm the host and moderator for tonight's presentation. But before I get started, I want to give a little background on the Conservancy for those who may not be familiar with our organization. The Conservancy was founded 20 years ago with the belief that the history of Santa Monica is best explored in the built environment. With a focus on education and advocacy, the organization is a leading voice for historic preservation and repurposing of older buildings. Since our founding, the number of landmark sites in the city has tripled, and 3 historic districts have been established. But to help us continue our important work, we invite you to join or donate to the Conservancy by using the Zoom chat function at the bottom of your screen. We thank you. The closed caption function is also located at the bottom of your screen for those who wish to use that. Today's program continues our series that focuses on the diverse communities whose history and culture have contributed a vital piece to the mosaic we call Santa Monica. Today we are introducing the church in Ocean Park, which is a community within a community. A church whose mission is to ensure the inclusiveness, diversity, and empowerment of those who are often marginalized or so ignored. Committed to the welfare of the surrounding neighborhood, the church has been a hub for numerous programs that address the needs of many who are often overlooked by traditional agencies. Historian Nina Fresco will begin the program with an illustrated history of the church from its founding in the 1900s to its transition to community activism in the 1950s to the early 2000s. The current minister, Reverend Janet McKeithen, will bring us up to date on the church's programs with continued focus on advocacy and social justice. Julie Ginsburg, who launched Rockstar Kids for youth with special needs, and Roger Gahn, who organized queer prawn activities celebrating LGBTQ teens, will join Janet for a panel discussion. The program, as usual, will end with Q&A from the audience. And again, you can find your Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you may ask questions throughout the program. Nina Fresco is Conservancy board member and a current member of the Santa Monica Planning Commission. She has served 3 terms on the Landmarks Commission. And I would like to welcome Nina Fresco right now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nina Fresco, and I'm going to take you back to the beginning, before it all began. Early Santa Monica had been a place that left those in need in the hands of churches and well-intentioned socialites. Then came Reverend James Kahn in 1973 with a vision for a compassionate, multicultural church community. What happened next resulted in a host of new nonprofit social service institutions that forever changed the way people in crisis are supported in Santa Monica and beyond. Our story begins in 1875 with the first church built in Santa Monica, a tiny wooden structure which its Methodist congregation outgrew after 20 years. They built a grand new place of worship and moved the little church to Ocean Park, where in February 1901, it reopened its doors at 2621 2nd Street to serve Southside parishioners. Another 20 years passed, and the thriving little church was overcrowded again. On 2 lots next door at 235 Hill Street, a new church in the Italianate and Gothic architectural styles that featured dramatic stained glass windows was built, and the nearby parsonage was moved onto the site. The first services were held there on December 2nd, 1923. By 1961, most Ocean Park Methodist parishioners had passed away or moved on. The neighborhood had become home to a mix of old beatniks, young gays, aging Hollywood starlets, and juvenile delinquents. A major crime study found Ocean Park to have one of the highest crime rates in the country. In 1962, Reverend Dan Kennedy opened a teen center in the four-square house built next door, built in 1900 by community leader Alvin Archer. The church had recently added it to its campus. Dubbed the Ocean Park Community Center, it provided job listings, psychiatric services, homework assistance, and a safe place to keep kids off the street. In 1968, the Methodist Church withdrew funding from OPCC to focus resources elsewhere. The center rallied by establishing a board of directors and winning grant dollars. But sloppy accounting put it on the rocks again in 1971, forcing it to suspend most services. The Methodist Church did not assign a new reverend in 1972, abandoning Ocean Park. In 1973, fledgling minister James Caan, living in the mean streets of Venice, asked his bishop to allow him to create an alternative program in the 3 church buildings in Ocean Park for his first appointment. Caan was given 4 years to make his vision of a postmodern church which brought caring, empathy, and dignified relief to those struggling with poverty, self-sufficient. A new name, Church in Ocean Park, reflected the welcoming, pluralistic community. Meanwhile, in Santa Monica City Hall, an outlandish plan that included demolition of our pier led to the ouster of several community council members and replaced them with slightly more socially conscious members on the still all-Republican board. Reverend Caan was able to convince them to give OPCC a $10,000 social services grant. It was the first social services funding ever allocated by the city of Santa Monica. Thanks to the grant, the Church in Ocean Park campus was soon teeming with children served by a growing variety of programs. The church board held monthly meetings that ran past midnight as they sought hard-won consensus on every decision. The 20 or 30 member group included a community organizer and a feminist in residence who lived in the church belfry. Programming was on Sunday evenings, exemplifying the culture of the 1970s with poetry readings, political talks, and nude dancing. To pay the bills, they rented rooms to a law office called the Community Assistance League, and for group meetings and classes, including ballet, yoga, topless belly dancing, and Reichian therapy. In 1974, the Westside Women's Center, which served the lesbian community initially, but soon broadened its scope, moved into the parsonage. The Westside Women's Clinic was established off campus to provide health services, including abortions, which had become a protected right only a year before. By 1975, a poverty law center run by a group of Chicano law students from UCLA took over the office space. And the Children's Place, a new name for an old nursery school in the basement since the 1950s, had come into alignment with the philosophy and values upstairs by adding children of color to its enrollment, bilingual staff, and sliding fee scales. In 1977, the Women's Center established a women's shelter for victims of domestic violence. A relatively new idea in the 1970s, Sojourn was the first in the Los Angeles basin. A volunteer staff of 20 women ran a widely acclaimed pioneering shelter, allowing it to attract much needed state funding to increase capacity, hire paid staff, and serve as a model program. Meanwhile, housing rental prices were rising rapidly in Santa Monica, displacing long-time, low-income residents and sowing the seeds of a tenant uprising. In 1977, a retired labor arbitrator and 5 other New Deal era activists living on pensions allied with several young progressives to bring rent control to Santa Monica. They enlisted a legal aid attorney to draft a rent control ordinance. It qualified for the June 1978 ballot. Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights, a coalition of 5 activist groups in the city, was formed to manage the campaign. Rent control did not pass that first time. SMER revised the rent control measure for the next election. They raised campaign funds with dances and lectures at Church in Ocean Park and a local union hall in what organizers called the boogie strategy. The Center for Economic Democracy joined the fight to overcome efforts of the opposition that depicted rent control as a subversive communist plot. Rent control passed on April 10th, 1979, and 2 SMER-endorsed council members were seated. That same year, the church received a large crime-fighting grant through a program of the U.S. Department of Justice. The nonprofit Ocean Parks Projects was formed. They rented a basement office 1 block from the church. A program called Communitas created a system of block clubs that forged strong new relationships among Ocean Park neighbors. They organized community watch, self-defense classes, and more. A well-attended OPP Congress at the end of the first year resulted in the formation of the Ocean Park Community Organization. In 1981, SMER ran a full slate of 4 candidates for City Council: Reverend James Cahn, Denny Zane, Dolores Press, and Ken Edwards. They won easily. Up ballot, Republican Ronald Reagan swept the national polls to win the presidency. Conservative Santa Monica's simultaneous shift to the left attracted national attention. Santa Monica became well known for its leadership in using progressive ideals and business models as the basis for city government. They established an arts commission, the Santa Monica Farmers Market, the 3rd Street Promenade, inclusionary affordable housing requirements, sustainability programs, and much, much more. Through a seed grant from City Council in 1981, the nonprofit Community Corporation of Santa Monica was formed to protect and create affordable housing. Today, Community Corp manages over 1,800 deed-restricted affordable units in Santa Monica. In 2016, OPCC, still going strong, merged with other organizations to form the People Concern, which continues today to provide solutions to the challenges of homelessness and domestic violence through dozens of specialized programs. In 1995, Reverend James Cahn moved on from the church in Ocean Park after more than 20 years. The church and its members continue to stand for social justice, caring, and inclusiveness in Santa Monica and beyond, under the leadership first of Reverend Sandy Richards, followed by Reverend Janet McKeithen, who still serves today. Thanks for listening. Back to Libby.
Thank you, Nina. That sets us up for our next speaker, Reverend Janet McKeithen. In my introduction, I will say that Janet is an ordained Methodist elder. She's also president of the Santa Monica Interfaith Council and co-founder of both the Santa Monica Queer Prom and the Committee for Racial Justice. Reverend Janet, please welcome to our program.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Libby. And I'm so honored to be here. I thank the Conservancy for this wonderful opportunity to discuss this unique, awesome community called the Church in Ocean Park. And thank you to Nina Fresco, who has done an incredible job, not only of researching the history of the church in Ocean Park, but also of assembling a brief version of it tonight for us. Thank you for the bottom of my heart, Nina. A word about Reverend Sandy Richards. Most people who follow an iconic founder serve essentially as an interim pastor. But Reverend Richards was awesome enough to remain here for 10 years. Unbelievable. And she continued the legacy of social justice activism, including the creation of SMART. And then she brought activism and caring for our historic building together by inspiring our signature event, Communitas, which during her time here enabled the installation of a smooth floor where people could dance and sing and frolic. And as she was moving on, she did what few pastors do very well. She very lovingly nurtured the transition to my pastorate, and for that, I am indebted to her. I am lucky to have followed both of my good friends, Jim Kahn and Sandy Richards, two visionary, courageous leaders. I have been honored to have been serving for the pastor here since 2005. The church in Ocean Park is unusual. It is a hybrid creature, both a faith community and a nonprofit. It's an unusual faith community in that it is multi-faith, which means that we are Muslim, Jewish, Wiccan, Christian, Buddhist, atheist, Hindu, a variety of indigenous religious expressions, and some folks are a combination of more than one of these. Music is vital to our life together. Led by music director Louise Dobbs and Dr. Kim Harris, who is here, the music is inspiring, moving, and varied. There's no litmus test to be involved at the church in Ocean Park, but we do have core values. One of them is our belief that all people are of sacred worth and should be treated with dignity and respect. But as we know, people are not treated with dignity and respect, especially those who live on the margins of society. We at the church in Ocean Park work to change the systems that are causing harm, which sometimes mean that we upset folks for whom the status quo is working just fine. That has been the case with a few of our programs, but especially the Committee for Racial Justice, or CRJ. Racism undergirds the very systems that are a part of our everyday lives, but they can be invisible to those of us who benefit from them. When CRJ formed over 10 years ago, racism was not discussed in many places. As a matter of fact, we were told we were making a big deal out of nothing, and many times people would tell us to stop what we were doing. The church in Ocean Park didn't sit down and plan to have a committee for racial justice. CRJ began in 2011 when we responded to a racial incident that happened at Santa Monica High School that was then covered up for 3 weeks. When the cover-up was leaked, we went to the school board meeting to address it. And I announced that there would be a community meeting at the church in Ocean Park. And we had our first community workshop on racism and patriarchy a couple of weeks later, with Reverend Jim Lawson keynoting. The 10 people who came together to plan that workshop, 5 white and 5 black, became the CRJ Steering Committee. We have held monthly community workshops and been actively engaged in anti-racism work ever since. While racism affects many cultural groups, the Committee for Racial Justice is especially drawn to focus on the severe impact it has on the African American community. The Church in Ocean Park also works against racism perpetuated on other groups through our Philippine Task Force and our work with Justice LA and the Poor People's Campaign, among others. The Church in Ocean Park is unlike most nonprofits who sit down and plan programs for other people. Our programs begin in the community, are focused on the community, and led by folks in the community. I just gave an example with the Committee for Racial Justice, but here are a few other examples. Our Girl Central program for middle and high school aged girls. The Church in Ocean Park had a relationship with the YWCA through our anti-racism work. When we heard that the YWCA was closing and that their program for young women would disappear, we brought the Girl Central program to the Church in Ocean Park. It consisted of education, empowerment, dance, yoga, Girls Who Code, and field trips. The encouragement group. I met Donna Brown through CRJ. Donna's beloved son, Cliff, was murdered near USC, and she asked me if we had a program for people who lost loved ones through gun violence. I told her we did not, but I asked her if she'd like to start one with a team. She said yes, and in honor of her son, Cliff, Donna and her daughter and a young couple began the encouragement group, and 7 years ago with the support and guidance from the church in Ocean Park. Donna Brown is now trained and serves as one of our chaplains alongside the Reverend Joseph Hepburn. Another program that birthed out of the church in Ocean Park is Climate Action Santa Monica, or CASM. CASM grew out of a passion to slow or reverse the destruction of the planet. CASM has since launched into the community on its own and now includes Climate Corps, a fantastic program for young people educating and activating the public. LGBTQIA programs. In 2008, my picture and story were on the front page of the LA Times because I was agreeing to officiate same-gender weddings, which is against the rules of my denomination, so I could be defrocked. The Samo High GSA faculty member saw the article and invited me to participate on a panel with a minister who held opposing views. That began a relationship between the GSA and the church in Ocean Park. I was often at club meetings on campus or meeting them after school, and out of that came the first queer prom, as well as queer film nights, alternative Valentine's Day events, homecoming out day parties, karaoke for a cause, and other gatherings. For the last 3 years, Santa Monica Cares and the City of Santa Monica have co-sponsored our queer proms in the community, but the other events have not happened since the pandemic. Rockstar Kids. I was a member of the Special Education District Advisory Committee for 10 years, and I knew some of the tremendous barriers for parents of students with special needs. After stepping down from that role, a couple of us attended a CDAC meeting where they discussed their charges for that year. We wrote down the needs we heard from committee members that the school was not able to address. And during public comment, I offered to have coffee with anyone who wished to discuss how we might meet some of those needs through the church in Ocean Park. And Rockstar Kids was born out of those conversations. These are examples of how programs happen at the church in Ocean Park. They happen by the community, with the community, and for the community. When the pandemic hit, 2 new programs were instantly created in which we plan to continue. When our lives suddenly changed in March 2020, the ground was shifting underneath our feet. Church in Ocean Park developed 8 connecting circles and invited folks in the community to join one. Many of those circles have been meeting once a week for 2.5 years. Strangers have become friends and have gone through struggles of life during this unsettling time together. We also found a need for self-care and healing. So we created Tuesdays at 2, where people could experience different healing modalities that they could then take and practice on their own, like Qigong, yoga, meditation, acupressure, self-massage. Though we were busier than ever online, some of our programs were put on hold during the pandemic. Just as other buildings and other groups were opening up, our ceilings started to fall down. And now it isn't safe for people to come into our building until we replace our entire ceiling. 2 of the programs that really need to be in the sanctuary will be discussed tonight: LGBTQIA gatherings and Rockstar Kids. They both benefit from safe space and the inclusive spirit of the church in Ocean Park. Religious institutions have caused serious trauma to both of these communities, and the church in Ocean Park was physically demonstrating that they are people of sacred worth just the way they are. At the church in Ocean Park, they found home. You will hear a bit more about them in a moment, but my heart breaks not to be able to open the doors for these programs. Every one of our programs are expressions of the church in Ocean Park. They're not stepping stones to some larger group or larger agenda. They're full expressions on their own. The church in Ocean Park is a community asset. We are people of many different backgrounds and beliefs working together to make a positive difference in the community. We believe in the sacred worth of every person, and we open the doors to those who may have been shut out of other places or just need a safe space to be themselves where they can grow and thrive. Wherever and however you find yourself, you are welcome at the church in Ocean Park. Back to you, Libby.
Lovely. Thank you so much. You have really set up the the preview for our next two guests, who will talk about specific programs that have been sort of coalesced around the church. I'd like to introduce the panel, and then each panel member will give a little bit of information about their particular project. UCLA student Roger Gahn is a queer trans man who has been active in LGBTQ programs and served as president of Samohi's Gender and Sexuality Alliance. That's what you called GSA, Janet, and led the annual Queer Prom in 2021. Julie, as a parent of a special needs child, advocates for him and for the community in general, the special needs community in general. She started the first special education position at Franklin Elementary. Now I'd like to turn it over to Roger, and I will ask you some questions, and we will get back to Julie in a minute. Roger, there has been a consistent buildup of your knowledge and experience advocating for social justice. As a freshman at Samohi, you participated in a walk down protesting gun violence following the Parkland shooting. When we had our conversation, Roger, on the phone, we were talking about activism. And one doesn't just walk out and be an activist. There were tools that you learned on this that were quite helpful for you. Maybe you can give me give us an idea of some of the things that you learned, particularly from Reverend Janet.
Of course. Thank you, Libby. Hello, everyone. My name is Roger. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I, as Libby said, I'm an activist. My activist journey goes back a long ways, but as Libby mentioned, in my freshman year of high school, I was a student at Santa Monica High School. I had started with a group called CCEJ, which I am now still involved with, and I've got a lot of roots there. But the Parkland shooting occurred, the Parkland tragedy occurred that year when I was a freshman. A few of us just from my school had formed a short walkout on campus, and after that, our group from our school and groups from other schools in the area founded a group called LASAC, the Los Angeles Student Activist Coalition. I was a founding member of that group. Reverend Janet met us and a few students from my school around that same time that we were founding LASAC, which was huge because it's one thing if you're a group of students at the same school who can meet in a teacher's classroom somewhere, but when you're from several schools around the city, you do eventually need somewhere to meet. And Janet tracked us down and said, hey, there's nobody in the church on a Thursday afternoon. You can come use our space. And she lent us the space of not only the sanctuary itself, but when our meetings would inevitably run long, because we only had about a month to plan the huge walkout that we held at City Hall on April 20th of that year. She let us use the upstairs part of the church, her private office, as well as the downstairs part whenever we needed to, just to make sure that we had somewhere to meet and to organize. She lent to us her years and years of activist experience and wisdom to make sure that we had all the information and tools available to us, rallied other volunteers within the community to help us out. We had very literal physical help from her in terms of like AV equipment and the church's van and people helping us with setup and takedown. She helped us navigate all the forms from the city to get the permits that we needed, which, being 15, 16, 17 years old, were full of jargon that none of us had worked with before. And she really helped all of us do what was this whirlwind of an endeavor. She really helped us all take it in and break it down in a way that made sure we knew it was possible. There were meetings when even our own members were like, I don't know if we can do this. And Janet would step up and say, because normally she wouldn't speak in the meetings if she was there at all, she would let us run it ourselves. But in those moments of doubt, she would stand up and say, I can promise you this is going to work. We do not have to worry about the numbers. We can do this. It's just about if you want to and if this is what you believe in. And so we made it work. And it was a really great achievement that we were then able to be honored by through Communitas, which Janet and Nina both talked about already that same year. I've continued to work closely with Janet over the years, particularly with Queer Prom. But yeah, she has really shaped the activist that I have become.
Speaking of the Queer Prom, what a great segue. Why don't you let us know, you're I know you didn't begin the queer prom. This was something this preceded you by a couple of years. Give us an idea of the planning. I think I'm especially interested in the 2021 prom, but there are some notes that you probably want to give on the earlier proms. So with that, we will run some pictures to go along with your comments about the prom.
Sounds great. As Reverend Janet mentioned before, she had been working on the queer prom for many years before I became part of it. These first few images are actually of proms that I was not a part of. She and I were talking about it, and the first queer prom actually happened in about 2010. A few years after that, the San Monica GSA lost touch with Janet. And so she and the Church in Ocean Park continued to run the queer prom on their own to make sure that that staple of the community was still there, which is a huge gift to the queer community in place. And now here you can start seeing some images appearing of the 2021 queer prom, which is the one that I chaired. Having met Janet in 2018 and becoming close with her there, I started working with her. I started discussing queer prom stuff with her around 2019 because I was coming into a position of presidency within the San Monica GSA. We started talking in 2019. We put together the first homecoming out party, which I was really proud of and spent all day helping set up for. And then the pandemic hit before we could throw the actual prom that would have been my inaugural. So we couldn't do anything in 2020. But in 2021, Janet reached out to me saying that the city had followed up with her again to sponsor something. And she asked me if I thought we could do it. And I said, absolutely. I know some people in the city. And so I brought in my whole GSA, everyone that we still had left after more than a year of meeting online, where for many students, it was really hard to be part of an openly queer club when they were still within their homes and had to be seen by their parents. But we still had some members. I was able to bring them in. I had my connections in the city that I was able to invite, including Christopher Smith, Santa Monica's LGBTQ liaison. And Janet came with her whole team of the wonderful volunteers and activists within the church, as well as bringing in Santa Monica Cares, and particularly Evan Edwards, who had reached out to her. We all came together, and as always seems to happen when I am brought on for an event, we had about a month to make this whirlwind of something happen. And where my previous event planning experience had been events with a budget of maybe $50, usually $0, I was suddenly thrust into a position of running an event worth thousands of dollars. And thrust is the wrong word. I could not have been more eager or excited to be part of this. We decided on our theme, Enchanted Forest Masquerade Ball. We managed to get a whole bunch of decorations and make everything work. We found our venue, the Annenberg Community Beach House, who very generously sponsored us as well and helped us cut down on costs, which the city then covered the rest of it. We were fully catered by it's Back on the Beach Cafe, and we're able to, we hired a professional DJ, we hired a professional photographer. We had plenty of truly incredible volunteers, one of whom also took photos of the event, which you saw previously. And yeah, it was truly a phenomenal event that I was so proud to have pulled together. My successor, Leo, ran the queer prom this year at the Water Garden in Santa Monica. He invited me to attend to see how it was going. I helped a little bit with setup, but I had work that day, so mostly I was just there. And it was truly mind-blowing seeing how he had taken the foundations that I had been able to lay by reconnecting with Janet and by bringing the city in and by setting up all those relationships with vendors and be able to build upon them to make something even better, so that it blew my mind. Even I had always known he was going to do something better, but I was still blown away by how impressive it was. And he has passed on the reins to his successor, who I trust is going to continue the program moving. So
I gotta tell you, your prom looked a heck of a lot better than my senior prom. It's just really, really elegant.
Thank you. I decorated all day.
I noticed, run by students. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Of course.
Now we're going to move on to Julie. Julie, I have some questions here for you. Remember that Julie has been the founder of this special needs sort of committee based on her own personal experience. So, Julie, so often activism is a response to a personal experience. And how, in your case, advocating for your son, Ben, a special needs child. How did that start? What steps did you take? Did you have a mentor, an advocate. How did the church, especially Janet, help you?
Thank you for having me. My son was born and he grew like a typical child until he was about 18 months old. And very quickly, I realized my son couldn't walk. And I began taking him to pediatricians and neurologists and physical therapists, and everything led down this long path until I finally found a developmental pediatrician who explained to me that my son had two conditions. One is called asymmetry, where one half of his body, the muscle tone is normal, and the other half is low tone. So he can't make his body work in unison. He was also diagnosed at 26 months with autism, and that helped contribute to his delays. So from there on, it was just a matter of finding providers and finding classes and therapists and figuring out if there were other children like my own. And sadly, my mom, who is my mentor, had the same experience when my brother had severe dyslexia. And in those days, that was considered a severe special need. And so after watching how hard my mom advocated for my brother, it was a stepping stone for me to form the Franklin Elementary School PTA for special needs. I noticed that children would come in and out of our classrooms and no one knew who they were or why they were there. And I felt that that was totally unacceptable. We needed to be proud of our community, especially of those children with special needs. And so by joining the PTA, I was then introduced to CDAC, the Special Education District Advisory Committee, where I got the amazing opportunity of meeting Reverend Janet. And in that meeting, Reverend Janet said to me, "My space is your space. Anything you need me to do to help you and your community, I'm in." And Janet has always provided us with a safe space, a judgment-free zone where our children can be themselves and socialize happily with peers. And that's why we created Rockstar Kids. It was a place, it was a safe space without judgment. We've been able to host amazing movie nights.
Let's see some photos of Rockstar Kids. Want to?
Yes, I would love that.
I think we need to get a flavor of this.
So this is our first ever Rockstar Kids event. And we have a dad who DJs, another parent who brings in all sorts of props. And I am in charge of all the food usually. And it's amazing because it is community-based. It's completely paid for by the families. And families who can't afford, we all chip in so that no one feels left out. We've also, like I said, had movie nights where the kids can get up and move because traditional movie theaters are just not for some of our kiddos. And we also have goals of having parent information sessions. So prior to the pandemic, we had organized an amazing event with an advocate, a special needs teacher, and a lawyer to help us figure out all of the rights that we have to protect our children in the community. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we had to cancel our event. And now, without a roof, we can't rehold it, which is really sad because it would be amazing if we could start doing things in person again, which our children so desperately need.
You've talked about the fact that you're kind of in full halt mode right now, but I'm wondering if you might share a little bit of star quality of your son vis-a-vis Sesame Street.
Sure. So my son was recommended by one of his physicians to be a representative for the new Sesame Street program called See Amazing. And it was when they launched their first autistic character. And so if you ever look up See Amazing on YouTube, there's a song and my son is featured in it 3 times. So that was really exciting to get to meet all the characters and be a part of such an amazing campaign that sheds light on the amazing attributes children with autism have and the abilities that they have.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And now we're going to open up the panel to questions from the audience. So I would like Nina to come back and join us if she will, if she's still around. Thank you, Nina. Thank you. And thank you, Julie. That was an interesting preview. This question is for Janet. Since these two speakers have talked so admiringly of you, I want to know, talk a little bit about your own development in supporting and advocating for social justice.
I want to say to Julie and Roger, my goodness, I am so moved. I'm very emotional right now. Thank you so much for your presentation. I am honored to know people like Roger and Julie. They are already working in the community, and I just happened to meet them at a certain point, and we start working together. That's the way that I see it. And that's how it's been at the church in Ocean Park. I've met amazing people. I've just inherited this amazing place where people just wander in and they become a part of it, and it's just incredible. But I think in order to answer the question, really what I need to talk about is my dad, because my dad was actually an activist who was very, very humble. And so he didn't, nobody knew what he was doing because he didn't broadcast it. He was sort of the opposite of being able to see what someone's doing, but he was doing it and with a lot of humility. And so people were not aware that what he was doing was actually sort of rebellious or against the status quo. So I think I got my start there, and then I just met people who pushed me along the way, who mentored me along the way. As Roger and Julie were saying, I had people along the way that did that for me as well. And I had my eyes continually opened. My eyes are continually opening to more and more perspectives of how the world is unfair and unsafe for some people. And so that's the way I would answer that.
Before I let you go, Janet, you touched on the collapse of the ceiling, which seems to be really a full halt on all activities that have been taking place in the church. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the Open Door campaign, so we can alert our audience that there's a need here. So could you talk a little bit about this tragedy and what you're doing about it?
Sure. So as was mentioned, as the buildings began to open back up after the COVID lockdown, parts of our ceiling came crashing down to the ground. We were lucky that nobody was inside at the time. After a thorough assessment of the ceiling, it was determined that the entire ceiling is unstable and could collapse on somebody's head at any time. So we cannot go in there. We need to raise $340,000 to replace the entire ceiling. So far, generous donors have contributed $125,000, and we are so incredibly grateful for those donors. The church in Ocean Park is a community asset. It's where people gather for support, for resources, to sing, to dance, to organize, to belong. It's a place where lives are celebrated from birth to death, and where people are recognized for who they are. Help us be once again a place for support and security and resources for people with special needs, for LGBTQIA folks, for young girls, especially with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and for those who are grieving. Help the community provide a safe space for those on the margins, and help the community come and sing and dance and frolic again. If you'd like to help, go to CIOP4justice.org and click on donate. And thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Janet. We will all write checks right now. Thank you. Nina, I have a question for you from an audience member. So much of the support of the church it seems to have come from the support of the city, and it seems awfully political sometimes. Is the city on board still with grants and various ways of attending to what the good programs that the church are doing?
That's a really interesting question, because the church is a nonprofit and has always, since the very, the early 70s, when it started changing the way it approached the world, has been very, very careful to be very separate from its political from the political action that takes place in the community that seems similar to the kinds of things the church is advocating for. So for example, when the church got that big grant in the 70s, and I guess it was 78, that led to the Communitas program and the Ocean Park Community Organization, they formed a completely separate nonprofit with different people and ran it completely separately because it was different kinds of work. And when the rent control activism began, there was a lot of crossover of people because they were interested in the same things, but the people who organized the political campaign were doing it separately under separate organizations. So because a lot of the people are involved, it looks blurred, but it's actually quite separate.
Right. That's good to hear. Julie, this person wants to know, given the fact that we're at a dead stop right now, what sorts, first of all, where do the children come from? And what sort of programs, activities do you have in your imagination for ongoing?
Sure. So all of the children come from Santa Monica mostly. There is word of mouth because we would never turn anyone away who doesn't live in the community. It started pretty much at Franklin where I began, and then slowly I met parents at Grant and at McKinley and then Lincoln and then Samuel High. And so now we've all, especially through CDAC and my work on the Parents Resource Network, we've really opened it up to all ages, which is fantastic. So like I said, right now, because of the pandemic and because of not having the church, we've been trying to do beach days. We try to do things at public parks. It's just not quite the same because we do have children who run away and elope. They call it elopement. So it's very frustrating. We really need a very specific spot so that we can accommodate all children. But future events would definitely look like panels that help parents advocate for their children. We'd love, excuse me, we would love it if, we could do more movie nights and parties and events because our children don't get serviced by the school district. We can't go to the local school carnival. It's just too much for them. It's input overload. So ideally we would like to start running things back to normal soon.
One addition, a question. You started the special education position at Franklin. Is there such a thing at Lincoln and at Samuel?
So I'm currently on the Lincoln committee now, and it's very frustrating because, every year we do have these positions and then somehow no one takes them over. So I don't know who's currently on the board at Samuel High. I know who took over at Franklin. We have representation at McKinley. There's a new person at Grant. But if anyone would ever like to get involved, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help put people in place. And
the children, there's no age limit. You can be a junior in high school and be part of this thing. Okay.
You could be in college. We've had adults with Down syndrome who get just as much out of it as the children.
Good. Thank you. Roger, you've moved on. You're a student now. And so I'm wondering, have you stepped back from all your activism? I can't believe it, but have you stepped back from some of your activism, or what's your current mood?
Well, I mean, Libby, I've been a student the whole time. I'm just a college student now, but no,
That's right. I forgot about that.
I was a student before that as well, but no, I have stepped back from certain parts of this work, but it's not to say that I've stepped back from activism so much as my roles have shifted, especially since a lot of my work is youth focused. As I get older, it doesn't make sense for me to be doing the exact same jobs. It makes the most sense for me to pass those reins down to the people it's meant to serve. So when it comes to like the queer prom, I'm still like in touch with everybody. I'm obviously still in touch with Janet. I'm still in touch in a more limited capacity with the Samuel High GSA, since most of the people that I was still close with there have now graduated. But I'm still like loosely connected to them in order to make sure that I can be present as a volunteer to help with setup and with takedown and with logistical elements that I might be able to be available for. But I do remember this past year, I was asked if I wanted to come to the planning meetings, and I said no, not because I don't think it would be a good time or because I don't want to help, but because I already got to run a queer prom and it was fantastic. And I'm really proud of that, but it's time for other people to be able to do it too. However, I am moving into positions at UCLA to be able to do very similar work on our campus, which is fun to do it like within a school setting as opposed to just for the city at large, though the event is not, I don't believe it's exclusive to UCLA students. And so I'm looking forward to that. And my other activist work has still continued. Obviously, I'm still connected to Janet, but I'm also and have been part of stuff that she's asked me to do with the church as well. I was invited to be part of Trans 101, which I was unfortunately unable to attend at the last minute because I had to go to a protest. But yeah, I had to bail on an activist thing to do a more immediate activist thing. It was very jarring.
Okay.
I'm still very much connected with the California Conference for Equality and Justice, which is a lot of where my roots are and a lot of where my activist training has come in. And I have actually attempted to connect them to Janet as well, because I think that they have I just really think that they would go well together. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing these days.
Right. We are going to end this Q&A with a very personal memory from somebody, which I will read, and you can see what I'm talking about. This person says, I grew up near the church in Ocean Park, and when I was 15, I dated James Cahn's son. A group of us kids hung out at his house often. I remember how welcoming and kind he was and how comfortable we were all in his home, even as awkward teenagers. I also remember a couple of years later, I was no longer dating his son. He heard that my family was going through a rough time, and he sent me a beautiful, heartfelt, and supportive letter that I still have to this day, 26 years later. Now, this memory comes from one of our own, the Mosaic Technical Director, Adina Bernheimer. Thank you for sharing it, Adina. Such a moving example of the church's enduring spirit. Thanks very much. Well, it's about time that all good things come to an end. And I want to thank our guests, Nina and Reverend Janet and Roger and Julie, for telling the story of the church in Ocean Park. Many thanks, well, to everyone in the Conservancy's program committee who helped put the show together, and to you, the audience, for your support of the Mosaic series. A reminder that this and previous Mosaic programs can be viewed by going to the events drop-down on our website, smconservancy.org. And please watch for our next Mosaic in early 2023. I also want to prop the pump and say, look forward to the activities that we are planning for our 20th anniversary celebration. And those things are in the works. And so stay tuned. And again, we encourage you to make a donation to help us with our continuing work on preserving our city's heritage. Thank you and good evening.